There are certain people who seem to be forged from a different kind of metal. They live lives so extraordinary, so packed with courage, skill, and history, that they almost feel like characters from a movie, but they're real. And for a very long time, we were lucky enough to walk among one of them. He was a man who grew up on a farm, learned to fly when the world was catching fire, and went on to duel with enemy fighters in the vast, cold skies over Europe. He flew 116 combat missions and never once took a hit from an enemy plane. He became a triple ace, a title so rare it's like a whisper from a bygone era of heroism. And he didn't stop there. He went on to command wings of fighter jets in another war, test the very limits of aviation technology, and live to the incredible age of 102, a walking, talking embodiment of the 20th century. When he passed away in May of 2024, we lost more than just a decorated veteran. We lost the last of a breed. We lost the last living American triple ace of World War II. This is the story of a man who wasn't just a witness to history, but who strapped himself into the cockpit and made it. This is the story of Bud Anderson. To truly appreciate a man like Bud Anderson, you have to picture the world that made him. He was born Clarence E. Anderson on January 13, 1922 in Oakland, California, but his roots were in the soil of a farm near the small town of Auburn in Northern California. This was America between the wars, a nation recovering from one global conflict and blissfully unaware of the next one looming on the horizon. His childhood wasn't one of city lights and modern conveniences. It was one of open fields, hard work, and the simple, powerful rhythms of agricultural life. He learned the value of a long day's labor, the importance of self-reliance, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing a job through from sunrise to sunset. This was the era of the Great Depression. Life wasn't easy, money was tight, and the future was uncertain for millions. But for a boy growing up on a farm, there was also a sense of freedom, of vast open spaces that stretched to the sky. And it was that sky that captured young Bud's imagination. Like many boys of his generation, he was captivated by the pioneers of aviation, the barnstormers, the mail pilots, the record breakers like Charles Lindbergh. Flying was more than just a mode of transportation. It was the ultimate adventure, a symbol of human ingenuity and daring. It represented a departure from the dusty earth and a leap into a future of limitless possibilities. It's no surprise that when the storm clouds of war finally burst, Bud Anderson, the farm boy who had spent his youth looking up at the California sky, knew exactly where he wanted to be. He wasn't just going to defend his country. He was going to do it from the cockpit of a fighter plane. The event that propelled Bud and an entire generation into action was, of course, the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The shock and outrage that swept across the United States was a powerful call to arms. For young men like Bud, who was then just shy of his 20th birthday, the path was clear. He enlisted in the United States Army and began the journey that would define his life. He entered the Aviation Cadet Program, a rigorous and demanding training regimen designed to turn civilians into military pilots in the shortest possible time. The training was intense. Cadets washed out at an alarming rate. They were pushed to their physical and mental limits, learning everything from aerodynamics and navigation to gunnery and combat tactics. It was a high-stakes education where the final exam would be fought thousands of feet in the air against a determined enemy. In September of 1942, Bud Anderson pinned on the silver wings of a pilot. The farm boy from Auburn was now a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army Air Forces. He had no idea then, but he was on the cusp of becoming a legend. In late 1943, Bud Anderson arrived in England, a world away from the sun-drenched fields of California. He was assigned to the 363rd Fighter Squadron, part of the 357th Fighter Group, stationed at RAF Leiston. The 357th was a new group, filled with young, eager pilots like Bud, ready to take the fight to the German Luftwaffe. They were nicknamed the Yoxford Boys, and they would soon earn a reputation as one of the most fearsome and effective fighter groups in the 8th Air Force. Their weapon of choice was the North American P-51 Mustang, and what a weapon it was. The Mustang was a game changer. With its powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and long-range capabilities, it could escort American bombers all the way to Berlin and back, protecting them from the swarms of German fighters that had been decimating the bomber fleets. For pilots like Bud, the P-51 was a dream machine, fast, agile, and heavily armed. It was the perfect tool for the deadly craft of aerial combat. Bud quickly proved he was a natural. He had an innate feel for the airplane, a kind of sixth sense that separated the good pilots from the great ones. He was calm under pressure, a clear-eyed hunter with uncanny situational awareness. In the chaotic, three-dimensional violence of a dogfight, he could process information in a split second, anticipate his opponent's moves, and position his Mustang for the kill. He named his P-51 Old Crow, after a brand of bourbon whiskey. It was a name that would become synonymous with his own. He would fly 3 different Mustangs, all bearing that name, and they would become his chariot in the sky. His first aerial victory came on March 8, 1944. The 357th was escorting B-17 bombers on a massive raid to Berlin. It was a deep penetration into the heart of Germany, and the Luftwaffe came up in force. In the ensuing melee, Bud found himself in a swirling dogfight with a Messerschmitt Bf 109. He later described the experience with his characteristic coolness and precision. "You don't have time to be scared," he would often say. "You're too busy. You're focused on the mechanics of it, on flying the plane, on getting your sights on the target." He outmaneuvered the German pilot, lined up his shot, and squeezed the trigger. His 6.50 caliber machine guns tore into the enemy aircraft, which spiraled down, trailing smoke. It was a defining moment. He had been tested in the ultimate crucible of combat and had emerged victorious. That first victory was just the beginning. Over the next year, Bud Anderson would engage in dozens of dogfights, his score steadily mounting. He became an ace on May 27, 1944, when he shot down his 5th enemy aircraft. He then became a double ace with his 10th victory. By the end of his 2 combat tours, his official tally stood at 16 and a quarter aerial victories, making him a triple ace. The quarter victory came from a shared kill, where he and another pilot were credited with shooting down the same aircraft. This achievement placed him in an elite fraternity of pilots. But perhaps even more remarkable than his impressive score was another statistic. In 116 combat missions covering some 480 hours of flight time, Bud Anderson's Old Crow was never once hit by enemy fire. It's a staggering fact that speaks volumes about his skill. He wasn't just a great marksman, he was a master of defensive flying, a pilot who understood that the ultimate goal was not just to shoot down the enemy, but to survive and fly again the next day. He knew when to press the attack and, just as importantly, when to break off. This combination of aggression and prudence is what kept him alive when so many others perished. One of his most memorable and harrowing encounters occurred on May 12, 1944, during a mission to escort bombers to the oil refineries at Merseburg, Germany. It became known as Black Monday for the 8th Air Force due to the heavy losses. The 357th engaged a massive formation of over 200 German fighters. Bud got separated from his squadron in the chaos. Alone deep in enemy territory, he was bounced by a group of Focke-Wulf FW-190s, For several minutes, he was in a fight for his life, twisting and turning, using every ounce of his skill in the Mustang's performance to evade his attackers. He managed to shoot one down, but was still hopelessly outnumbered. Just as his luck seemed to be running out, his squadron mates, who had been searching for him, arrived on the scene and drove off the remaining German fighters. It was a stark reminder of the razor-thin margin between life and death in the skies over Europe and the crucial importance of teamwork and sticking with your wingman. This incident, rarely highlighted but detailed in his memoirs, reveals the vulnerability even of a great ace and the role that luck and friendship played in survival. Bud's relationship with his aircraft, Old Crow, was more than just a pilot and his machine. In the lonely, high-stakes world of a fighter pilot, the plane becomes an extension of the self, a trusted partner in a deadly dance. He knew every sound, every vibration. He could feel what the plane was doing, anticipate its limits, and push it right to the edge, but never beyond. The name itself, Old Crow, came from the cheapest bourbon available at the time. It was a bit of a joke, a nod to the simple pleasures that kept the pilots grounded amidst the chaos of war. It was this lack of pretense, this down-to-earth quality, that made him so respected by the men he flew with. He wasn't a show-off or a glory hound. He was a professional, a leader who led by example. His closest friend in the 357th was another legendary ace, Chuck Yeager. Their friendship was forged in the crucible of combat and would last a lifetime. They were a study in contrasts. Yeager was the brash, swaggering West Virginian with a rebellious streak. Bud was the calm, steady Californian. But they shared an uncanny talent for flying and a deep, unspoken bond. They flew together, fought together, and celebrated their victories together. Yeager, in his own autobiography, spoke of Bud with immense respect, calling him the best fighter pilot I ever saw. Coming from a man who would go on to break the sound barrier, that is perhaps the ultimate praise. Bud's descriptions of aerial combat are devoid of romanticism. He spoke of it as a job, a deadly serious business. In an interview years later, he reflected on the psychological toll. You see your friends go down, you go to the briefing in the morning and there are 16 of you. You come back in the afternoon and there are only 12. He spoke of the emptiness of seeing a vacant bunk in the barracks, of the quiet grief that was a constant companion. Yet he and his fellow pilots found ways to cope. They developed a dark humor, a kind of gallows wit that helped them push away the fear. They focused on the mission, on the technical aspects of flying and fighting, because to dwell on the what-ifs was a luxury they couldn't afford. A quote that truly captures his mindset comes from his memoir, To Fly and Fight. You don't fight because you hate what is in front of you. You fight because you love what's behind you. For Bud, that was his family, his country, the farm in Auburn, the life he was fighting to protect. It was this deep sense of purpose that fueled his courage and sustained him through the darkest days of the war. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, Bud Anderson returned home a hero. But like many veterans, he found the transition to peacetime life challenging. The adrenaline-fueled world of combat was replaced by a quiet and uncertain future. For a man who had spent the last 2 years dueling with the enemy at 30,000 feet, civilian life could feel mundane. Fortunately, the Army Air Forces had a place for men with his unique skills. The post-war era was the dawn of the jet age, a time of incredible technological advancement and high-speed experimentation. Bud's next chapter would be written not in the skies of combat, but on the cutting edge of aviation as a test pilot. He was assigned to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, the heart of the Air Force's research and development efforts. Here, he flew and evaluated a dizzying array of aircraft, From the early temperamental jets to bizarre experimental designs that pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible, it was work that was, in its own way, as dangerous as combat. Test pilots were constantly flying unproven aircraft, pushing them to their breaking points to find their limits. It required an immense amount of skill, engineering knowledge, and raw nerve. Bud excelled. His wartime experience gave him an intuitive understanding of what made a good fighter plane. He could provide invaluable feedback to the engineers, helping to shape the next generation of American military aircraft. His career continued to ascend. He moved from flight testing to positions of command. He attended the Air War College, grooming him for senior leadership roles. During the Vietnam War, he once again found himself on the front lines, but this time as a commander. From 1970 to 1971, he commanded the 355th Tactical Fighter Wing, based at Tak Lee Royal Thai Air Force Base in Thailand. His wing flew the F-105 Thunder Chief, affectionately known as the Thud. The Thud was a massive, powerful fighter bomber tasked with one of the most dangerous missions of the war, striking heavily defended targets deep inside North Vietnam. As the wing commander, a full colonel, his primary job was on the ground, planning and directing the missions. But Bud Anderson was not the kind of leader who sent his men into danger while he sat safely behind a desk. He insisted on leading from the front. Despite the immense risk, he personally flew 25 combat missions over North Vietnam, flying the same dangerous routes as his younger pilots. It was an extraordinary act of leadership, one that earned him the undying loyalty and respect of his men. He understood that to truly lead, you had to share the risks and understand the reality your people were facing. There were no major controversies in Bud Anderson's career. He was a man defined by duty, professionalism, and integrity. However, if one were to look for a point of historical debate, it might lie in the very nature of the air wars he fought, the strategic bombing campaigns of World War II, which he helped make possible by protecting the bombers, resulted in immense civilian casualties and the destruction of entire cities. Similarly, the air war in Vietnam was a brutal and often controversial campaign. Bud himself rarely, if ever, spoke publicly about the political or moral dimensions of the wars he fought. He saw himself as a soldier, a professional tasked with carrying out the mission his country gave him. His focus was on tactical execution, on leading his men effectively, and bringing as many of them home as possible. This single-minded focus was typical of his generation of military leaders. They were not political commentators. They were warriors. To understand Bud Anderson is to understand that mindset, a deep and abiding sense of duty that transcended political debate. He was a patriot in the purest sense of the word, a man who answered the call and did his job to the very best of his considerable ability, leaving the larger historical judgments to others. Bud Anderson retired from the Air Force in 1972 as a colonel after 30 years of distinguished service. He had logged over 7,000 flying hours in more than 100 different types of aircraft. But he wasn't done with aviation. He immediately began a second career as the manager of the McDonnell Douglas Flight Test Facility at Edwards Air Force Base, the legendary home of flight testing in the California desert. He was back where he felt most at home, surrounded by the most advanced aircraft in the world, mentoring a new generation of test pilots. He finally retired for good in 1998, but he never truly left the world of aviation. In his later years, Bud Anderson became something he probably never expected to be, a living legend. As the years went by and the ranks of his fellow World War II veterans thinned, he became an invaluable connection to a pivotal moment in history. He was a regular and beloved figure at air shows and aviation events. Well into his 90s, he would sit for hours, patiently signing autographs, shaking hands, and sharing his stories with wide-eyed admirers. He co-authored a memoir, To Fly and Fight, which is considered a classic of aviation literature for its honesty, clarity, and humility. He wasn't just recounting war stories, he was preserving a legacy. He was ensuring that the sacrifices of his generation, the lessons they learned, and the values they fought for would not be forgotten. The ultimate recognition of his incredible life and service came on December 2nd, 2022. In a ceremony at the Aerospace Museum of California, in front of his family, friends, and fellow airmen, 100-year-old Bud Anderson was promoted to the honorary rank of Brigadier General. The promotion was championed by his old friend Chuck Yeager before his death and was a fitting tribute to a lifetime of service. Air Force Chief of Staff General C.Q. Brown Jr., who presided over the ceremony, summed it up perfectly. Bud's story is a testament to the courage and the dedication of the greatest generation, and a reminder of the importance of air power. For Bud, it was a moment of profound, quiet pride. The farm boy from Auburn was now a general. His passing on May 17, 2024, at the age of 102, marked the end of an era. He was the last living American triple ace of World War II. With his death, we lost our last direct link to that extraordinary group of pilots who saved the world from tyranny in the skies over Europe. His historical significance is immense. He was a warrior who helped win a world war, a pioneer of the jet age, a leader in a Cold War and a hot war, and finally, a custodian of history. He represents the very best of the American military tradition: skill, courage, leadership, and humility. His life teaches us that true heroism isn't about seeking fame or glory. It's about answering the call of duty, doing your job with excellence, and serving a cause greater than yourself. When you look back on the long, remarkable life of Bud Anderson, it's not just the numbers that stand out, not the 116 missions, the 16 and a quarter victories, or even the 102 years. What truly resonates is the character of the man behind the achievements. He was a hero who never saw himself as one. He was a legend who remained at his core the humble, hard-working boy from the farm. He was a product of a specific time and place, a member of the greatest generation who faced down global threats with a quiet, steely resolve. His story is a powerful antidote to the cynicism of our own age. It's a reminder that individuals of great character can and do shape the course of history. He wasn't motivated by ideology or hatred. He was motivated by a love for what he was protecting: his family, his home, his way of life. That simple, profound motivation is what allowed him to climb into the cockpit of Old Crow day after day, to face death and never flinch. There's a quiet beauty in a life so fully and honorably lived. Bud Anderson saw the world change in ways we can barely imagine. He saw the dawn of the aviation age, fought in its most brutal conflict, helped usher in the era of jets and space travel, and lived long enough to become a revered elder statesman of the sky. He flew, he fought, and he led, and he did it all with a grace and humility that defined him. He was the last of his kind, and we are all incredibly fortunate that he was one of us. His legacy is not just in the history books or in the museums, it's in the clear blue sky he so fearlessly commanded, a permanent reminder of a life spent looking upward. In the vast, unforgiving theater of the Second World War, there are battles whose names are etched in blood and legend: Normandy, Stalingrad, Iwo Jima. And then there is Tarawa, a tiny sun-scorched speck of coral in the middle of the Pacific, a place so heavily fortified that a Japanese commander boasted it couldn't be taken by 1,000,000 men in 100 years. In November of 1943, the United States Marine Corps was about to try and take it in 3 days. What followed was 76 hours of pure, unadulterated hell, a meat grinder of machine gun fire, mortars, and desperate close-quarters combat. But in the midst of this chaos, in the first critical hours when the entire invasion hung by a thread, the outcome of the battle and the lives of thousands of men would hinge on the actions of one lone figure. This wasn't a general or a high-ranking strategist. He was a quiet, unassuming first lieutenant from Texas who, by all accounts, shouldn't have even been in the military. A man whose body was mapped with the scars of childhood adversity and whose spirit was forged in the hardships of the Great Depression. This is the story of William Dean Hawkins, a man who refused to die until his job was done, and whose incredible courage would earn him the eternal title, the man who wouldn't quit. To understand a hero like Dean Hawkins, you first have to understand the world that made him. He was born in 1914, a child of a world about to be torn apart by the Great War. But his own battles began much earlier. As a toddler, still in his cradle, he suffered a horrific accident, scalding himself with boiling water. The burns were so severe that he struggled to walk for the first year of his life, a constant, painful reminder of fragility. The physical scars would remain with him forever, a faint roadmap of pain on his skin. His childhood was shaped by further loss and hardship. His father died when he was just 8 years old, leaving his mother, Clara, to raise 2 children alone in El Paso, Texas. She was a resilient woman working as a secretary and later a teacher at the El Paso Technical Institute to provide for her family. They weren't wealthy, but they had grit. This was the America of the Great Depression, a time when self-reliance wasn't a choice, it was the only means of survival. Dean Hawkins embodied that spirit. He was bright, graduating from El Paso High School at just 16 and earning an engineering scholarship to the Texas College of Mines. But his education was a patchwork affair, stitched together between periods of working any job he could find. He was a cartographer's assistant, a railroad brakeman, a ranch hand, and even an insurance clerk. These weren't just jobs to pay the bills, they were his real-world education. Ranching in the rugged Texas landscape taught him independence and observation. Working the railroads gave him a powerful physique. Engineering gave him a mind for solving practical problems. He was becoming, piece by piece, the exact man the Marine Corps would one day need, long before he ever considered wearing a uniform. Then, on December 7th, 1941, the world changed forever. The attack on Pearl Harbor sent a shockwave across America, and like millions of other young men, Dean Hawkins felt the undeniable call of duty. His first instinct was to fly. He applied to the Army Air Corps. They rejected him. The scars from his childhood burn, they said, made him unfit to be a pilot. He tried the Navy's air arm. They rejected him for the same reason. For a man who had overcome so much, it was a bitter pill to swallow. But William Dean Hawkins was not a man who took no for an answer. If they wouldn't let him serve in the air, he would find his place on the ground. On January 5th, 1942, he walked into a recruiting office and enlisted as a private in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. The service with the toughest reputation had just gained one of its toughest sons. The Marine Corps didn't see scars. They saw potential. Hawkins blazed through boot camp in San Diego and was immediately singled out for his intelligence and quiet intensity. He was selected for the elite Scout Sniper School, a course designed to create the eyes and ears of the infantry. These weren't just marksmen. They were masters of reconnaissance, infiltration, and survival. It was a role that fit him perfectly, appealing to the observational skills he'd honed as a ranch hand and the precision of his engineering mind. By the summer of 1942, Private Hawkins was shipping out to the Pacific. His destination was a malaria-infested, jungle-choked island that would soon become infamous, Guadalcanal. This was his baptism by fire. On Guadalcanal, the war wasn't about grand strategies. It was about small unit actions, patrols that disappeared into the suffocating green hell, and sudden violent encounters with a determined enemy.